I tend to have a pragmatic view of when to pull an SDK package into my project. A lot of times I'll just avoid doing it. Maybe it's a simple enough API. I can just use Laravel's HTTP client. Maybe if it's a little more complicated than that, I could use a package like Saloon, which is still fairly lightweight and lets me define how I want the API to work. But one SDK that I bring in for sure if I need it is AWS. So here I have the AWS SDK for PHP installed. And the reason I feel this is necessary is because interacting with that API is a little bit more complicated than I like to roll by hand. So no, there's no shame in pulling this in. It's useful. In fact, that's why we have packages and a thriving ecosystem, is that we can use these things. But let me show you something here. If I go to the documentation for this SDK, I'm just going to start scrolling. And I just got to the B's, right? So maybe you're thinking, I had no idea there were this many services. I only want to use S3, or I only want to use EC2 or CloudWatch. And now I'm getting like literally hundreds of services brought into the SDK. Why might that matter? Well, let's just show. So I did a composer install here. And if I look at the size of my vendor folder, okay, 118 megabytes. I don't, maybe we don't know how to weigh that. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Does it matter? But now let me repeat that command just for the AWS directory. 46. So what this means is that Laravel, all the things it brings in, I have dev dependencies, so I've got things like Sail and Mockery and PHP unit. All of that is just a little over half the size of my complete vendor folder. Just the one AWS package brings in 46 megabytes. All right. What can we do about this, if anything? There's an interesting approach that this particular SDK offers, which is to remove unused services. So I'm going to show you how it works, and then we'll see what the impact is. So the first thing you do in the script section, you add a new script called pre-auto load dump. All right, so if I paste that in. All right, so it looks like this, and I'll link you to the documentation to show, to get this. So I don't have to worry about trying to copy this. But this is coming from inside the AWS folder. This is a script they provide, so we're not hacking anything. This is like a feature of the SDK, and it's got a composer script just called remove unused services. So how would it know what is unused? Is it going to look at our code and see what we're actually using? No. We have to tell it what we're going to use. So if we scroll down further, in this extra section, we can add a list of the AWS services that we intend to use. So in this particular example, I'm telling it I'm going to use EC2 and I'm going to use CloudWatch. You could put in there whatever you want, and the list of the available services I just showed in the docs, but this is those two steps. So we added the script, we told it what we intend to use. Now, if I remove the vendor folder and I reinstall, composer install, the first thing to notice, it scrolled by kind of quick, is this script did run and it gave some output, removed 396 AWS services. I think that's pretty substantial, but let's actually measure it. So if I rerun that command, how big is my AWS folder? It's 5.9 megabytes. So remember, it was 46 megabytes before, representing almost half of our entire vendor folder. Now it's 5.9 megabytes. So it's a pretty reasonable size. Now, you might consider this a micro optimization. Like, what does it matter if I have 40 extra megabytes of AWS packages? It's more than just the disk weight. Those all represent classes that have to get put into the autoload. Those are all things that get, to a certain extent, like that class map gets loaded into memory on each request. So it may not move the needle for your project, but for me, if it's something easy enough to do, I'm not hacking the project, right? I'm not doing something unsupervised or unrecommended. This is like in the documentation. Then why not do it? If anything, it's a nice clear signal to somebody coming and looking at my Composer JSON, like what aspects of the AWS SDK am I using? So I think it's worthwhile at least to know this is an option. If we go back to the browser here, so in the AWS SDK docs on GitHub, they explain how to do this. And there's some other gotchas and things. You want to read this. It's not very long, but it's good to know that's there. The other thing I'm just going to point out, maybe you don't use AWS. Maybe you're using Google APIs, which also is another one of these mega cloud providers where their SDK does everything. They have something similar, right? So they're saying there's 200 Google API services. I guess AWS is a little bigger. But they give a similar way to kind of thin it out after you install the SDK. So it's useful to read the documentation. Maybe that's the lesson to take away from this video, because that's how I found out about this. I just was reading the docs. I saw that. I'm like, wow, that's a really useful thing. I'm going to use that in my project. So I'm sharing it with you today.